Hello everyone, so I'll be talking about improving password selection. Um, so in a recent survey of 8,000 people done by Keeper Security, it was found that 25% of people are using strong passwords. So this sort of indicates that password selection is still an issue that we should look into. So our approach for it was to think of password selection as being a decision that's made in the presence of risk. If you choose too weak of a password, then you risk your information being compromised. If your password is too long, then you risk forgetting it and having other memorability issues. And so we wanted to look into what behavioral models exist that tell us about decisions being made under these conditions of risk. And so we looked into the behavioral model of prospect theory, which is currently the best model for understanding how people make these decisions under risk. So of the 6 observations of prospect theory, we focus on 2. The first being the reference dependence effect, which is the idea that you make one of the options neutral, and you use that neutral option as a baseline, and you compare that option, and you use that baseline to compare the other option too. The second observation that we focused on was the loss aversion effect, which is the idea that loss feels more impactful than gain. And so we also wanted to focus on the interaction between the two in forming the framing effect, which is the idea that you make the better option neutral, and therefore the worst option you emphasize its loss, and therefore you would be more inclined towards that better option. So we did 2 user studies. Our first study, we gathered participants from Amazon Mechanical Turk, and for our second study, we gathered participants from Prolific. So for the study itself, what we had participants do was create an account for an aggregated news site that we created. Participants from the first study were provided an email, and participants from the second study had to use an email that was given by Prolific. So if their initial password was weak or moderate, then this pop-up would show up, and it would ask the participants if they would like to return to improve their password. So they would have the 2 options of yes, I would like to go back, and no, I would like to continue. And so because we wanted to learn more about the reference dependence effect in terms of password selection, we had the following conditions. So we first had a positive framing, which emphasized the benefits of returning and improving your password, while the continue option was more neutral. And then we also had a neutral condition, which was just a simple yes or no. And then we also had a negative framing condition, where the option to go back was neutral, and the option to continue, it sort of emphasized the loss and the consequences of continuing with that weak password. So if they did decide to go back, then they would return to this screen where they would be able to change their password. Once they did so, or if they initially chose to continue, or if they initially had a strong password, then they would be taken to this screen, to the website, where we asked them to explore the website for a few minutes. Once they were done, they had to enter a confirmation code, and then afterwards they had to complete a follow-up survey. For ethical reasons, we did not record any plain text passwords. And so for our first hypothesis, we were thinking that users assigned the negative framing condition would be more likely to strengthen their passwords compared to participants who were given the neutral framing or the positive framing. And so here were our results. So here, this is a breakdown of the people who improved their password from those that went back. So here we have the 3 different conditions on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we have the different percentages. So here we can see that those that were shown the negative framing and decided to go back, over 26% of those people were able to actually improve their password, which was significantly higher than both positive and neutral framings. And so here we have the total population's final password strength. So on the x-axis, we have the number of guesses it would take for a password to be cracked, and on the y-axis we have the percentiles. So, the fewer passwords that were able to be cracked, the stronger the passwords they were. So in this case, the blue line, which indicates the negative framing, overall, because there were less passwords that were able to be cracked, that meant that the passwords were overall stronger compared to the negative framing. Compared to the positive framing, excuse me. And so for our second study, in addition to validating our findings from the first study, we also wanted to look into other things. So for the second user study, we wanted to see what was the impact of having more information whenever people are selecting their password. So we added the condition of so initially we had this condition from the first study where whenever they were making their password, there was a password meter present, which indicated the strength of their password. But for this second user study, we also added the condition where there was no password meter, and so whenever they were creating their password, there was no indication of how strong it was. We also added another condition where for the prompt, for the pop-up, it would also include suggestions. So in this case, it would include suggestions such as make sure to add another word, uncommon words are better. There were other suggestions such as try not to use too many, or try to use more symbols and stuff like that. And so for our hypotheses, we believe that those that were shown the password meter would be able to strengthen, or more likely to strengthen their password compared to those that were not shown the password meter. And then also, those that were given the suggestions would be more likely to strengthen their password and ultimately select a stronger password than those that weren't. And so here were our results. Unfortunately, there's nothing really significant here. As we can see, like, they were all very much the same. And so on to the next. Once again, we have the password strengths. So we have the initial password strength and the final password strength. And in the x-axis again, we have the number of guesses it would take for a password to be cracked. So in this case, again, the lower amount of passwords cracked, the stronger they were. So the important thing to note for these results is that the first line and the second line, the two black lines, represents the strength of those that were not shown the meter. And the interesting thing about this is that despite not having a meter shown, so despite them not having any indication of how strong their password was, those people were still able to end up improving their password, similarly to those that were shown the password meter. And so how exactly did the passwords change? So of the 71 users that ended up going back to improve their password, 71% of those people were actually successful in doing so, which suggests that people already know exactly how to improve their passwords. It's just a matter of just getting an opportunity to do so. We also found that a minority of the users that did go back to improve their password were not successful in doing so, with 8% of the users that went back ended up using the same password, 5% ended up making small edits of less than 3 changes, and then 13% ended up making drastic changes, sometimes even using completely different passwords, but were still not successful in improving their password. So this suggests that having those suggestions could be useful for this minority of people that who go back but were not successful in improving their password. So really quickly, some limitations of our study was the lack of realism. This was due to the fact that participants were using random emails or emails that we gave them when making their account, so there isn't really any connection towards that account that they had made. And also the fact that since it was a news site, there could have been like this perception that there was no inherent danger of a news site, and so, or the fact that maybe because it was a study and it was a news site, maybe they did not plan to ever reuse that site, and thus the sense of risk could have been hindered and resulting into weaker passwords overall. And so for our key takeaways, so in order to improve the password selection, we believe that having a reminder after their initial password is important, is an important thing to have, and give them the opportunity to return back and actually improve their password. And we also suggest that having that negative framing is most effective, where we emphasize the loss and the consequence of continuing with a weak password. We also believe that having suggestions could be useful for a minority of users that are not able to successfully improve their password. And we believe, and for further work, further work would be needed to understand the actual impact that this would have on memorability, and also to explore the validity of online password studies. Thank you.